The night was ruthless. Rain pounded against the tin roof of the small auto repair shop, each droplet echoing like a warning from the heavens. The mechanic wiped sweat and rainwater from his brow as he locked up for the night. The dim glow of the street lamp barely illuminated the desolate road outside. Most people had taken shelter long ago, but not him. His work didn't stop for a storm. Then, through the downpour, headlights flickered in the distance. A sleek, black luxury car struggled along the flooded street, its tires skidding against the wet asphalt. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then, silence. The car rolled to a stop right in front of his garage. For a moment, he hesitated. No one drove a car like that around here. It was out of place, like a diamond in a pile of gravel. A shadow moved inside. A woman. The door creaked open, and she stepped out into the storm, her figure barely visible through the sheets of rain. Her long coat clung to her form, soaked through, her hair matted against her face. There was something off about her posture. She wasn't just a stranded driver. She was afraid. "Need help?" he called out. She hesitated before nodding. The car just stopped. Her voice was strong, but there was an undertone of distress she couldn't quite hide. The mechanic grabbed his flashlight and jogged toward the car, rain drenching him instantly. As he got closer, he noticed something strange. The car wasn't just dead, it looked like it had been tampered with. But before he could inspect further, a pair of blinding headlights appeared down the road, another car speeding towards them. The woman flinched. The mechanic knew that kind of reaction. It wasn't just some broken-down rich woman caught in the rain. She was running from something. "Get inside," he said quickly. She hesitated. I don't think. Now." His tone left no room for debate. He opened the garage, ushering her inside, then quickly locked the door behind them. Outside, the unknown car slowed as it passed, its headlights sweeping over the garage before disappearing into the darkness. The woman exhaled sharply. Relief? Fear? Maybe both. The mechanic grabbed a towel and handed it to her. Who were they? She hesitated before answering. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." He didn't push. Instead, he went to work, pulling off his soaked jacket and grabbing his tools. As he worked, she watched him, studying him carefully. He could feel her eyes on him, as if she were trying to figure him out just as much as he was her. After what felt like forever, he finally closed the hood. "Try it now." She slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the engine roared back to life. She smiled for the first time that night, but there was something else in her eyes. Gratefulness, maybe. Or something deeper, like she had just escaped something terrible. She reached into her coat pocket. "How much?" He shook his head. "Nothing." Her brows furrowed. "Why?" "Because you needed help. And I could help. Simple as that." For a long moment, she stared at him, her lips parting slightly as if she wanted to say something. But instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, golden emblem. She pressed it into his palm. "If you ever need help," she said, her voice low and serious, "use this." Before he could ask what she meant, she put the car in drive and pulled away, disappearing into the rain-soaked night. He looked down at the emblem in his hand. It was no ordinary token. And something told him, his life was never going to be the same again. The storm had passed by morning, but something inside the mechanic hadn't settled. He kept replaying the night in his head, the mysterious woman, the strange car, the headlights that slowed but didn't stop. And now, there was this. He turned the small golden emblem over in his hand. It was heavier than it looked, with an intricate design etched into the surface. It didn't have a name or symbol he recognized, but something about it felt important. He slid it into his pocket, shaking his head. Not his problem. The day went on as usual, tuning engines, replacing parts, handling the everyday grind of a mechanic's life. The night before felt like some bizarre fever dream. And then, it happened. A deafening roar filled the air, vibrating through the metal walls of the garage. Tools rattled on the workbench. A gust of wind kicked up dust from the ground. The mechanic stepped outside, then froze. A massive black helicopter was descending from the sky, its rotors sending waves of hot air through the lot. The townspeople gathered, their faces full of confusion and curiosity. No one in their small town had ever seen anything like this. The helicopter's wheels touched down in front of the garage. Men in black suits stepped out first, their movements sharp and calculated. Then, from the aircraft's sleek interior, she emerged. The woman from the storm. Except now, she looked completely different. Gone was the soaked coat, the desperate look in her eyes. Now she stood tall, wearing a crisp, impossibly expensive suit, her hair styled with perfect precision. The aura around her had changed. People in town had assumed she was just a rich woman caught in bad weather. They had no idea she was someone important. The mechanic wiped his hands on a rag, standing firm as she approached. He wasn't sure what to say, but she spoke first. "You're not an easy man to find." He frowned. "Didn't seem that hard." She smiled, not a friendly smile, but one that held secrets. "No, I suppose it wasn't." The men in suits stood like statues, watching everything. Something about them didn't sit right. The mechanic crossed his arms. "You didn't come all this way just to say hello." "No," she reached into her pocket and held up something small and familiar. The same golden emblem. His pulse quickened. "You said this meant I could call for help. Not the other way around." She tilted her head. "I lied." The mechanic clenched his jaw. Something about all of this felt off. Then she said the words that sent his world into chaos. "You saved my life that night, but you don't even know how. Now, I need you again, before it's too late." The crowd watched in silence. No one moved. No one spoke. But inside, the mechanic could feel it, whatever he had stepped into was far bigger than he realized. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he should walk away, or step deeper into the unknown. The mechanic stared at the woman, her words hanging in the air like a loaded gun. "You saved my life that night, but you don't even know how. Now, I need you again, before it's too late." The weight of the moment pressed down on him. The crowd around them whispered in hushed voices, eyes wide with curiosity. A billionaire's helicopter landing in a nowhere town? It wasn't something anyone saw every day. But the mechanic didn't care about the crowd. He cared about the way her guards were standing, too stiff, too alert. These weren't just security men. They were something else. He dropped the oil rag in his hand. "I don't get involved in things I don't understand." The woman's expression didn't change. She already expected him to say that. "You understood enough to help me that night," she said. He shook his head. "That was different. You were stuck in the rain. You needed help. Simple." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "It wasn't just the rain. And I wasn't just stuck." The mechanic's jaw tightened. He knew it. Something was wrong that night. One of the men in suits cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Ma'am, we don't have time for." She shot him a look that could have cut steel. He immediately stepped back. She turned her attention back to the mechanic. "There's something I have to show you. It won't take long. Then, if you want me to leave, I will." The mechanic glanced at the helicopter. Everything about this felt wrong. But then he looked at her face. There was something there. Not just power. Not just money. It was desperation. And for some reason, that made him pause. 5 minutes, he said finally. That's all you get. She gave him a small, knowing smile. That's all I need. The suits escorted him toward the helicopter, their faces unreadable. As he climbed inside, he couldn't help but think, whatever I just walked into, there's no walking back out. The doors sealed shut, the sound of the rotors roaring back to life. The mechanic barely had time to strap in before the helicopter lifted off the ground, leaving his quiet life far behind. Inside the helicopter. The mechanic had never flown before, let alone in something as sleek and high-tech as this. But he wasn't here for the ride. He turned to the woman. All right. You've got 5 minutes. Start talking. She exhaled, as if she had been waiting for this moment. Then she said something that made his stomach drop. They weren't just headlights in the rain that night. That wasn't just some random car passing by. The mechanic narrowed his eyes. You were being followed. She nodded. And if you hadn't helped me, I wouldn't be here right now. The words hit him like a hammer. It wasn't just a good deed. It wasn't just a lucky break. He had unknowingly stepped in front of something much, much bigger. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small, silver device, no bigger than a lighter. She handed it to him. This was planted in my car the night I broke down. He turned it over in his hands. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. What is it? He asked. She hesitated before answering. A tracker. But not just any tracker. This, she paused, locking eyes with him, is military grade. And it wasn't put there by my people. A slow, sinking feeling crept into his gut. He looked at her. You're saying someone wanted you dead? She didn't blink. I'm saying someone still does. For a long moment, the mechanic said nothing. Then he handed the tracker back. This still isn't my problem. She studied him carefully. It is now. Something in the way she said it made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The helicopter lurched suddenly, shaking violently. Red warning lights flashed inside the cockpit. The pilot cursed under his breath, gripping the controls. What's happening? The mechanic asked. The woman's face darkened. We're not alone. Outside the window, through the clouds, a second aircraft was approaching fast. And it wasn't here to say hello. The mechanic gripped the seat as the helicopter jolted violently. The red warning lights inside the cockpit flashed like sirens, bathing the cabin in an eerie glow. The pilot shouted something into his headset, his hands white-knuckling the controls. Outside the window, cutting through the thick clouds, a second aircraft approached fast. And it wasn't here for a friendly visit. The billionaire woman stayed eerily calm, her fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. She had expected this. Who are they? The mechanic demanded, his heart pounding. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned to one of the suited men. Get ready. The man gave a sharp nod and unbuckled his harness, pulling a sleek black case from under his seat. The mechanic's stomach twisted. Oh, hell no. I didn't sign up for this. She shot him a look. You didn't sign up for anything. But now you're in it. Outside, the second aircraft, a sleek, military-grade jet, angled toward them. It was moving fast, too fast. The pilot cursed. They're locking onto us. The mechanic clenched his fists. This was insane. 1 minute, he was fixing engines in a backwater town. The next, he was strapped inside a billionaire's private helicopter dodging an attack from God knows who. The woman finally turned to him. I need you to listen carefully. No, I need to get off this. We don't have time for that. Her voice was dead serious. That tracker? The one I showed you? They know you have it. His stomach dropped. She continued. That's why they're coming after us now. You touched it. They traced you. The mechanic's pulse hammered in his ears. He had unknowingly marked himself as a target. What do they want? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. She hesitated. Then, for the first time, he saw a flicker of real fear in her eyes. If they get it, she said quietly, it's over. The mechanic's throat went dry. Then. Boom. A loud explosion rocked the helicopter as something grazed their tail rotor. The pilot fought for control, the aircraft tilting violently to one side. They're firing on us, the pilot yelled. The billionaire woman didn't flinch. Deploy countermeasures. One of the suits punched a button, and suddenly, metallic flares shot out behind them, glowing bright against the stormy sky. The incoming missile veered off course, exploding harmlessly in the air. The mechanic barely had time to process what was happening before the woman grabbed his arm. There's only one way out of this. The mechanic didn't like the sound of that. What are you talking about? He asked. She reached under her seat and pulled out a parachute. His eyes widened. Oh, hell no. She tossed it at him. You'll be fine. Fine? I don't even like ladders. Then don't look down. Before he could protest, the door slid open, and the wind hit them like a truck. The helicopter was losing altitude fast. You need to jump, she said. The mechanic looked outside, the ground was a blur beneath them. This is insane, he shouted over the roaring wind. She leaned in. You don't have a choice. The second aircraft was closing in again. The mechanic cursed under his breath. Then, before he could change his mind, he jumped. Falling through the sky. The wind roared in his ears. The world spun violently as he plummeted through the sky. He pulled the cord. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the parachute exploded open, yanking him back with brutal force. The mechanic gasped for air, his pulse racing. He floated downward, the earth rushing up to meet him. Above him, the helicopter was still under attack. He watched in horror as a second missile locked onto it. The billionaire's voice echoed in his mind. If they get it, it's over. The helicopter veered sharply. Then. Boom. A fireball engulfed the sky. The mechanic's breath caught in his throat. Had she just? His feet slammed into the ground, the parachute dragging behind him. He collapsed onto the dirt, gasping for breath. For a long moment, he lay there, staring at the sky. His heart pounded. She was gone. And now, he was alone. With no answers. And no idea who was coming for him next. The ground was cold and unforgiving beneath him. The mechanic lay on his back, breathing heavily, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sky above was still flickering with the fading glow of the explosion, the helicopter was gone. He forced himself to sit up, his muscles aching from the violent landing. His parachute was tangled in the dry brush behind him, the wind tugging at the fabric like ghostly fingers. The billionaire woman was gone. His mind replayed the last few seconds before he jumped. Had she made it out? He clenched his fists. He had no way of knowing. But one thing was certain, whoever had attacked them wouldn't stop here. And he was now the only person left who had the tracker. Alone in enemy territory. The mechanic scanned his surroundings. He had landed in the middle of a barren, rocky landscape, no buildings, no signs of life. Just dry earth, jagged hills, and a deep silence that felt unnatural. His instincts screamed that he needed to move, fast. Still gripping the golden emblem in his pocket, he forced himself onto his feet and started walking. If someone had tracked them mid-air, they could track him on foot too. He needed to get somewhere safe, fast. But where? The town he had lived in his whole life was miles away. Even if he could get back, would it be safe? Would they be waiting for him there? His pulse quickened at the thought. For the first time, he realized he had no idea who he was up against. Military? A private organization? Mercenaries? All he knew was this: he was being hunted. The shadow in the distance. He had been walking for what felt like an hour when he saw it. A vehicle. A dark silhouette against the barren landscape. It was parked. Waiting. His breath hitched. Were they watching him? Or worse, had they already found him? He crouched behind a rocky ledge, heart pounding. Then, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, wearing a suit, but not like the billionaire's security detail. This man moved differently. Cold. Calculated. Trained. The mechanic's gut twisted. Whoever this was, he wasn't here to talk. The man scanned the area, then started walking toward him. They knew. They knew exactly where he was. The mechanic's fingers twitched toward the golden emblem in his pocket. He had no idea what it meant, or why the billionaire had given it to him. But something told him this was the moment to use it. He pulled it out, turning it over in his hand. It still made no sense, just a heavy, circular emblem with etched symbols he didn't recognize. The man was getting closer. Then, before the mechanic could react, the emblem glowed. A sharp pulse of light shot from its surface, spreading outward like an invisible ripple. The mechanic's breath caught. What the hell was that? The man in the suit stumbled backward, his expression changing instantly, from cold confidence to outright fear. He reached for something under his jacket. A weapon. The mechanic's instincts took over. He bolted. The chase. The sound of gunfire shattered the silence. Bullets kicked up dirt behind him as he sprinted, his muscles burning, his lungs screaming for air. Another shot. Then another. Whoever this man was, he wasn't trying to scare him. He was trying to kill him. The mechanic reached the edge of a steep hill. His boots skidded against the dirt. No time to think. He jumped. His body tumbled down the rocky slope, stones scraping against his arms and legs. He hit the bottom hard, the impact knocking the breath out of him. Pain shot through his ribs. But he had no time for that. Above him, the man was still coming. But something was different now. The mechanic felt it. Something had changed the moment the emblem had pulsed with light. And judging by the way the man had reacted, whoever these people were, they feared it. Which meant he had a chance. A mysterious message. He forced himself onto his feet, gasping for breath. Then, for the first time, he noticed something. The emblem in his palm was still warm. And now, there were words on it. Faint, glowing letters. The mechanic's stomach twisted. Because the words were not in a language he recognized. But somehow, he understood them anyway. It was a set of coordinates. And below them, one more line. Run. They're coming. His blood turned to ice. He had no idea where those coordinates led. But he had no choice. Because if this was real, if the billionaire had truly known this was coming, then this was his only way out. He didn't wait. He ran. And behind him, somewhere in the distance, the first of many pursuers closed in. The mechanic's legs burned, his breath ragged as he sprinted across the uneven ground. The coordinates burned in his mind, numbers he had no way of understanding, yet somehow, he knew exactly where to go. Behind him, gunfire cracked through the air. The man in the suit wasn't alone anymore. More figures moved through the landscape, dark silhouettes closing in from all directions. They were coming for him. And they weren't going to stop. The safe house that shouldn't exist. The mechanic pushed forward, his instincts guiding him toward a cluster of abandoned buildings in the distance. It looked like an old military outpost, weathered structures, rusted metal gates, forgotten by time. But as he got closer, he noticed something strange. The lights were on. Not flickering like an old generator, but steady. Controlled. Someone was here. And somehow, they were expecting him. The emblem in his pocket buzzed softly. Keep moving. The mechanic didn't question it. He reached the gate and pushed it open, stepping into what looked like an abandoned garage. Only it wasn't abandoned. The moment he entered, the walls hummed to life, panels shifting with smooth, mechanical precision. The room wasn't old, it was high-tech, hidden beneath a crumbling disguise. A figure stood in the shadows, waiting for him. The mechanic froze. Then, the person stepped forward. It was her. The billionaire woman. She was alive. His breath caught in his throat. You, how? She raised a hand. No time. Outside, the sound of vehicles approaching sent a chill down his spine. She motioned to a metal panel in the floor. We need to go. Now. He hesitated. He had questions. She must have seen it in his eyes, because she finally sighed. All right, she said, stepping closer. You want answers? The mechanic nodded sharply. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Then you need to understand something first. She gestured toward the golden emblem in his hand. That's not just a token. It's a key. And you, whether you like it or not, are now part of something much bigger than you ever imagined. The mechanic's blood ran cold. She held out her hand. Now, are you coming or not? Outside, footsteps closed in. The mechanic exhaled. Then, without another word, he followed her underground. The metal door slammed shut behind them, sealing the underground tunnel in near silence. The only sounds were the mechanic's heavy breathing and the distant hum of machinery somewhere deep below. The billionaire woman moved fast, her steps precise as she led him through the dimly lit corridor. The mechanic's mind raced. She was alive. She had survived the explosion. And now, she was leading him deeper into a place that shouldn't exist. The hidden facility. The tunnel opened into a massive underground chamber, lined with advanced tech that looked years, maybe decades, beyond anything he had ever seen. Screens flickered with scrolling data. Holographic maps pulsed with energy. The air had a hum of power, as if the entire place was running on something not entirely human-made. The mechanic slowed his steps. Where the hell are we? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to a control panel and placed the golden emblem against a scanner. The moment it touched the surface, the entire room shifted. Walls pulled apart, revealing a hidden vault at the far end. Inside was a single object, resting on a platform of glowing light. A small metallic sphere, pulsing softly, almost alive. The mechanic felt his chest tighten. He didn't know what it was. But somehow, he felt like he had seen it before. The truth about the golden emblem. The billionaire woman turned to him. You wanted answers, she said. The mechanic nodded slowly. She gestured toward the emblem in his palm. That's not just a key, she said. It's proof. Proof of what? She took a breath. Then she said the words that would change his life forever. You weren't supposed to be a mechanic. The words hit him like a hammer. His pulse pounded in his ears. She continued. You think you've lived a normal life, but you haven't. Your memories were altered. Your past was erased. The mechanic felt the ground shift beneath him. That's insane. She shook her head. It's the truth. And that, she pointed to the pulsing sphere, is proof of what you really are. He took a step back. What do you mean, what I really am? She hesitated. Then, quietly, she said, you weren't just some random good Samaritan that night. You were drawn to me because you used to be part of this. She gestured to the hidden lab around them. This was your world. Before they took it from you. The mechanic couldn't breathe. His entire life, everything he thought he knew, was a lie. The enemy closes in. A sudden alarm blared through the facility. The billionaire's face darkened. They found us. On the overhead screens, security footage showed dark figures moving toward the entrance. The men in suits. The people who had been hunting him. The mechanic's hands shook. None of this made sense. None of it. But one thing was clear, whoever they were, they wanted him gone. The billionaire grabbed his wrist, forcing the emblem into his palm. You have a choice, she said, her voice urgent. Run and hide, or fight and remember. Outside, the enemy was getting closer. The mechanic looked down at the emblem in his palm. He had no idea who he used to be. But one thing was certain. He was about to find out. The alarms screamed through the underground facility. On the security screens, figures in black suits moved in tactical formation, weapons drawn. They weren't just coming to capture. They were coming to kill. The billionaire woman tightened her grip on the mechanic's wrist. We don't have much time. You need to make a choice. The mechanic's heart hammered against his ribs. His whole life, everything he thought he knew, was a lie. And now, the people who had erased his past were here to erase him again. He looked down at the golden emblem in his palm. It pulsed softly, like it was alive. His mind screamed to run. To get out. To go back to the life he understood. But deep inside, something else stirred. A memory. A whisper of who he used to be. The door to his past. The billionaire woman moved fast, typing something into a holographic control panel. The metal vault door slid open, revealing a small room bathed in blue light. Inside, the strange metallic sphere still pulsed, waiting. She turned to him. Step inside. The mechanic hesitated. What is this? Her eyes burned with urgency. A failsafe. Your memories, your real ones, are stored inside that sphere. The mechanic's pulse spiked. This was it. This was the moment he could finally know the truth. But once he stepped inside, there would be no turning back. The enemy breaches. A violent explosion rocked the facility. The overhead security screens glitched, static flickering across them. The billionaire cursed under her breath. They're inside, she said. The mechanic gritted his teeth. If they reached him before he got his memories back, it was over. He took a step forward. Then another. Until he was inside the vault room. The billionaire rushed to the control panel. Once it starts, you can't stop it. He swallowed hard. Then do it. She slammed her palm against the activation panel. The sphere erupted with light. The mechanic gasped as pain sliced through his skull. His knees buckled. Then. His mind exploded. The truth revealed. Memories flooded in. Not one. Not two. Thousands. Flashes of a life he had never known, but at the same time, always had. A war. A mission. A betrayal. He saw himself, not as a mechanic, but as a soldier. A strategist. Someone powerful. And the people coming for him? They had been his enemies before. And he had destroyed them. Once. But they had erased him. Wiped him clean. And now? They had made a mistake bringing him back. The awakening. The mechanic's eyes snapped open. His body felt different. Stronger. Sharper. Every sound, every vibration in the air, he could feel it. The billionaire stared at him. "You remember, don't you?" she asked. He looked down at his hands. The golden emblem was no longer just an object. It was part of him. His gaze lifted to the security screens. The enemies were just outside the door. And for the first time since this nightmare began, he wasn't afraid anymore. He turned to the billionaire. "Let them come." The door exploded inward, metal shards flying as armed men stormed into the underground facility. Their weapons raised, their movements precise, trained killers. But the mechanic wasn't the same man they had been hunting. He had changed. His body moved before his mind fully processed, a reflex buried deep in his recovered past. The first attacker didn't even see it coming. With lightning-fast precision, the mechanic sidestepped, twisted his arm, and slammed his elbow into the man's throat. The soldier collapsed, choking for air before his head hit the cold floor. The next two opened fire. Too slow. The mechanic's hand flicked up instinctively, and the golden emblem hummed in response. A pulse of unseen energy burst from it, freezing the bullets mid-air before redirecting them, right back at their owners. The two soldiers dropped instantly. The billionaire woman watched in shock. "You weren't just one of us," she whispered. "You were our best." The mechanic felt it now. The power. The knowledge. The instincts. And with that realization, rage followed. These people had erased him. Stolen his identity. Hunted him. And now? It was time to end this. The battle for the future. More enemies rushed in, but they had already lost. The mechanic moved like a force of nature. A soldier tried to grab him, he flipped him over his shoulder. Another fired a stun charge, the mechanic caught it mid-air and redirected it. The battlefield became a blur of motion, weapons disarmed, enemies disabled. Within minutes, the entire strike team lay unconscious or dead. The last man standing was their leader, the one who had tracked him from the beginning. He didn't reach for his gun. He knew it was over. Instead, he looked at the mechanic, his face filled with something unexpected, recognition. "You should have stayed gone," the man muttered. The mechanic stepped closer. "But I didn't." His fingers tightened around the golden emblem. And with a final, blinding pulse of energy, he sent the man hurtling backward, slamming into the steel wall with a sickening crunch. It was over. The life lesson and the choice. The mechanic turned to the billionaire woman. "What now?" he asked. She studied him for a long moment. Then she said, "That depends on you." She gestured to the underground lab. "This place was built to protect people like you. People they tried to erase. You could walk away," she continued. "Go back to your old life, pretend none of this happened." She took a breath. "Or you can fight. Not just for yourself, but for everyone else they've done this to." The mechanic looked down at his hands. He had spent years thinking he was just a nobody. A small-town mechanic with a quiet life. But now he knew the truth. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a warrior. A survivor. And they had made the mistake of letting him remember. He looked at the woman. Then at the bodies of the men who had come to silence him. Then, finally, at the golden emblem, still warm in his palm. His choice was already made. He turned to the billionaire woman. "Let's finish what they started." She smiled. The fight was only beginning.